Please don't drag me out for drinks anymore, I said reluctantly. Right, I have a curfew now. I must be home before 10 o'clock. Under someone's watchful gaze, I made phone calls to my friends, explaining the situation one by one. Darling, this wouldn't happen to be Wallace Cargill's demand, would it? My friend chuckled on the other end of the line. Blushing, I glanced at Wallace, who was sitting calmly beside me, and weakly added, "It's a new rule I've set for myself." My friend retorted, "I've heard of henpecked husbands, but never a henpecked wife." I hung up the phone in frustration. Wallace glanced at me, his voice cool, "Don't let it happen again." Watching his retreating figure, I truly felt like I'd boarded a pirate ship with no way off. It's quite amusing, really. I'm Wallace Cargill's senior from university. When I first met him, he was just a second-year student. Simple white shirt, pure eyes, completely unworldly in appearance, holding a book and chatting cheerfully with classmates, the very picture of youthful vitality. Being the decisive person I am, I naturally went after him straight away. I don't want to have any regrets. I just want to tell you that I like you. Will you be my boyfriend? Wallace gave me a cool glance. You're allowed to have regrets. As soon as he finished speaking, I felt the temperature around us drop. If I couldn't have him, I'd pursue others. After all, there were plenty of handsome men around. What I didn't expect was that my dating escapades would end up ruining my reputation. When I broke up with my ex, he spread rumors about me everywhere, even mocking how I had chased after Wallace Cargill like a lovesick puppy. Wallace, tell us, did she really chase after you? Some busybody actually went to ask Wallace directly. Wallace pushed up his glasses and replied nonchalantly, "Pursuing me isn't embarrassing. What's embarrassing is how her taste has deteriorated since then." Later, I had little interaction with Wallace Cargill. Our next encounter was entirely due to my best friend claiming she wanted to introduce her brother to me. I thought she was pulling my leg, introducing a brother who was still doing homework, expecting me to treat him to KFC. The result? When Wallace Cargill walked in, I nearly choked on my juice. Perhaps the world is just that small. My friend was quite pleased as she said, "My brother goes to the same university as you, though not in the same department." "Hey, isn't he handsome?" she asked, raising an eyebrow, quite proud. I couldn't speak because Wallace Cargill had already sat down opposite me. When he saw me, he paused for 2 seconds, his gaze utterly calm, extremely cold. "Hello." Perhaps it was his attitude that irked me. I went home and told my friend I liked Wallace Cargill, asking her to help me win him over. So my friend came up with a direct approach, a fake marriage. It was truly absurd. But Wallace Cargill agreed very quickly, which I found strange, thinking he might have some interest in me. However, the truth was that he was being pressured by his family. I couldn't help but feel angry, turning it over in my mind, unable to understand what exactly he found lacking in me. The marriage was fake, but the certificate was real. Legally we were husband and wife, but Wallace Cargill never had any intention of fulfilling marital obligations. Instead, he often used money to control my behavior. At first, I thought he was young and indulged him, believing he would eventually run out of money for those things. But as I kept indulging him, I discovered he was truly wealthy, even more so than the rumors at university had suggested. As they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I decided not to miss any opportunity to interact with Wallace Cargill. For example, breakfast. Because it was a fake marriage, Wallace Cargill and I would eat together if our schedules aligned, and if not, we wouldn't bother. Up until now, we hadn't managed to align our schedules even once. Having made up my mind, I set 5 or 6 alarms, determined to wake up early and eat with him. However, the reality was that I rolled over in bed several times, painstakingly turning off the alarms one by one. What's a man compared to the importance of my lie-in? Around 11 o'clock. I yawned, knowing Wallace Cargill wouldn't be home for lunch and couldn't be bothered to put on makeup, so I went downstairs directly. I hadn't taken more than a few steps when I was scared enough to want to bolt. Winifred Cargill sat elegantly on the sofa, glancing at me with some dissatisfaction. She sipped her tea lightly, as if she hadn't seen me, facing towards the kitchen. I froze on the spot, also glancing at the kitchen. Wallace Cargill was bent over, busy chopping vegetables, completely focused. "Just look at you," Winifred said. Of all the girls I chose for you, which one was worse than her? Look what time it is. You've brought this wife home, and you still have to cook your own hot meal. Then, Winifred covered her mouth in feigned surprise as she looked at me. Oh my, you're awake. I'm quite direct with my words, don't take it to heart, dear. My lips quivered, but constrained by the fact that she was Wallace Cargill's mother, I didn't know how to respond. When she first heard that Wallace Cargill wanted to marry me, she refused outright, crying so dramatically it was earth-shattering. In the end, Wallace Cargill and I decided to save the trouble and didn't have a wedding ceremony. Mom, you talk too much, Wallace Cargill said in a flat tone, as if stating the simplest fact. I felt a bit awkward. Suddenly, I realized Wallace Cargill was like this with everyone, even his own mother. I'm just thinking of you, aren't I? She said. After speaking, Winifred shot me another cold glare. Wallace Cargill placed the soup bowl on the dining table, not even glancing at me, and said in a calm voice, I didn't marry her to have her cook for me. Fine. Fine, you're so capable. Winifred suddenly shouted. I trembled in fright, completely unable to interject, and not daring to either. Meeting Winifred's sweeping gaze, I felt as if my whole body was about to freeze, until she left, and I finally let out a sigh of relief, supporting myself on the sofa to stand steady. I'm sorry, she has quite a temper. And a rather loud voice, Wallace Cargill suddenly spoke up. I smiled and quickly waved my hand. No need to apologize, I'm fine. A loud voice means strong lungs and good health. As soon as I finished speaking, Wallace's hand paused while setting the cutlery. He glanced at me in the daylight, his expression somewhat unreadable. Before I could react, he pulled out a chair and said softly, You may be seated, Miss Yardley. Suddenly, I felt oddly flattered. What was this about? I hesitated for a moment, instinctively wanting to walk over, but seeing Wallace's impeccably dressed appearance, I immediately stopped in my tracks. Clearing my throat, I smiled and said, Could you give me 10 minutes? Wallace looked slightly puzzled. I'd like to put on some makeup, I explained. 10 minutes later, I picked up my fork, tucked a stray hair behind my ear, and said with a grin, Wow, this is delicious. Wallace's voice was very soft. Good table manners dictate we shouldn't speak while eating. I felt a bit deflated but obediently complied. After what seemed like ages, Wallace finally said quietly, Thank you for the compliment. News of Mrs. Cargill's visit spread quickly, and my best friend rushed over to check on me. Did his aunt give you a hard time? Are you all right? She asked anxiously. I'm fine. I curled up on the sofa, hugging a cushion and looking at her with a contented smile. Fine? My friend furrowed her brow, looking disgusted. Your smile is practically reaching your ears. I covered my mouth, laughing sheepishly. My friend blinked, suddenly seeming to realize something. She grinned mischievously, What's this? Have you won over Wallace Cargill? I was taken aback, realizing that I had become so elated by Wallace's small acts of kindness that I had completely forgotten our relationship hadn't progressed at all. I'll win him over eventually, I declared, clutching the cushion with determination. But as soon as I said it, I felt unsure. My friend saw right through me and said in a low voice, If it's not working out, you should back off quickly. Don't get your heart broken. That guy has never dated anyone from childhood to adulthood. He's quite stubborn. Finally, she added, friendly reminder, love can be dangerous. I chuckled, with his looks, I can handle getting hurt once. My friend was stunned for a moment, then looked like she wanted to smack me. You're blinded by his appearance. I couldn't help it. Wallace Cargill's face was just too irresistible to me. Kensington Group. I was wearing a vibrant red dress, adjusting my sunglasses, about to step gracefully into the lift when a hand stopped me. I'm here to see Wallace Cargill, I said. I'm sorry, miss, but you need an appointment, the receptionist replied. An appointment? I was a bit confused. I wanted to call Wallace, but feared interrupting his work, so I decided to text him instead. To my surprise, just as I sent the message, he called me. I was so startled I nearly dropped my phone, but managed to answer with a gentle voice. Hello. I've asked my assistant to come and get you, he said. My heart leapt with joy, and I couldn't help but respond softly. That's lovely, but I won't be disturbing your work, will I? Wallace, if you disturb me, you know the consequences. I had only meant to be coy and flirtatious. Wallace's words felt like a bucket of cold water thrown in my face. Suddenly, I lost all enthusiasm, but when the assistant came down, I still followed him up. Wallace wouldn't let me go out for drinks or clubbing, and as a freelance designer with no current projects, I was indeed quite free. I was also nursing a bit of resentment, sitting there waiting to win him over and prove myself. I swear, before I saw his face, I was actually a bit angry. But as I entered the office, the crisp scent that greeted me made my heart flutter. My gaze fell upon Wallace's expressionless but exquisite face. His suit jacket was draped over his shoulders. I rubbed my eyes drowsily, thinking I might be dreaming, and mumbled, "Darling, I'm hungry." "Speak properly," Wallace's voice was cool. I startled awake. "I'm hungry." "Wallace, what would you like to eat?" I pursed my lips, deep in thought, but as I pondered, my attention suddenly shifted. He was so close. The collar of his shirt was open, giving a glimpse of his collarbone and the slight protrusion of his Adam's apple. "Let me know when you've decided." Wallace looked away, his slender fingers rising to button up his shirt discreetly. "Why are you buttoning up?" "It's so hot today," I asked, feigning innocence. Wallace, holding his phone with a slight frown, replied, "I'm not hot." I couldn't help but smile secretly, sitting directly across from him at his desk, resting my chin on my hands as I gazed at him. Just seeing him made me happy. It felt as if years of pent-up longing had found an outlet, and that feeling of palpitating love began to spiral out of control once again. "Weren't you hungry?" "Come here," Wallace said as he tidied up the coffee table. His assistant placed the food on the table, giving me a curious glance. I smiled brightly and introduced myself. "Hello, I forgot to introduce myself earlier. I'm Meredith Yardley." The assistant paused, then chuckled. "Hello. Nice to meet you. I'm Mr. Cargill's assistant, Aubrey Thornton." "Aubrey Thornton?" I raised an eyebrow, feeling oddly familiar with the name. After a moment of thought, it suddenly clicked. Wasn't he the interviewer from my job application? I was about to speak up, but Aubrey shook his head slightly at me, so I just grinned and kept quiet. "How long do you two plan to stare at each other?" Wallace leaned back on the sofa, forcefully tearing open the chopsticks. "I have other matters to attend to." "Enjoy your meal, Mr. Cargill," Aubrey said, taking his leave. I was delighted, sitting down next to Wallace. I wiped my hands with a wet wipe and opened the lunchbox. "Why were you staring at Aubrey?" Wallace suddenly asked. I was just picking up some food when I heard his question. I couldn't help but laugh and retort, "Should I have been staring at you instead?" Wallace frowned, his face serious. "Our marriage was rushed, and I didn't have time to check your background. I'm concerned you might be a corporate spy." That answer was truly impeccable. I couldn't help but grin, raising an eyebrow at him. "Indeed, I'm a spy who's stolen your heart." Wallace Cargill furrowed his brow slightly, looking perplexed. Such a smooth talker. I picked up some food with my fork, humming. "Not at all, I'm telling the truth. You're the only one in my eyes." Wallace's jaw tightened, and he seemed to struggle with what to say before muttering, "Let's eat." I chuckled, feeling bold. "All right, whatever you say, darling." I blinked at him innocently, not giving him a chance to respond. "We have a marriage certificate, so calling you darling isn't too much, is it?" "I don't mind if you call me love. Perhaps realizing he couldn't win this argument, Wallace fell silent. Meanwhile, I felt like a giddy bird had taken residence in my chest, and I began chirping darling at every opportunity. "Darling, could you pass me that dish?" Wallace placed the dish in front of me. "Darling, I'm cold." Wallace adjusted the thermostat. "Darling, I want a hug." Wallace hesitated as he opened the car door, glancing at me. I clenched my fists and ran towards him, intending to wrap my arms around his waist. But before I could reach him, he held me back with a hand on my forehead. 190 centimeters versus 168 centimeters. I was utterly defeated. Just one hug, I pleaded. This is a fake marriage, Wallace reminded me, his dark eyes meeting mine as he lowered his voice. It wasn't clear whether he was speaking to me or to himself. At least I could sense that he was gradually lowering his guard, even if I still didn't get my hug. As we approached home, Wallace parked the car and said, "Meredith, we're here." Meredith? Wake up. I leaned back in my seat, eyes barely open, refusing to fully wake. To my disappointment, Wallace simply got out of the car. I was about to open my eyes when I heard my door open. A fresh, crisp scent wafted in. A pair of hands supported my waist, and I felt warm breath on my neck. Trying hard not to smile, I nestled into Wallace's arms as he lifted me, wrapping my arms around his neck. I allowed him to carry me into the house and to the master bedroom. But to my surprise, after placing me on the bed, he quietly said, "You can wake up now." Feeling a bit sheepish that he had seen through my act, I carefully opened my eyes, meeting his gaze with a nervous grin. Wallace looked down at me, his expression unreadable. "It's late. Get some sleep," he said softly. "Wallace," I called out, quickly grabbing his tie. As he leaned closer, Wallace hastily braced himself against the bed, his breathing becoming short and rapid. This distance was ideal for what I had in mind. I wanted to kiss him. But fearing I might go too far and anger him, I tentatively moved closer to his face. Seeing that he didn't pull away, I placed a gentle kiss on his cheek, then looked at him earnestly with a smile. "Good night, darling." Wallace's hand gripped the bedsheet tightly, as if suddenly coming to his senses. In that moment, I caught a glimpse of his reddening ears. He gave me a fleeting look before quickly leaving the room, closing the door behind him. I stared up at the ceiling, unable to contain my laughter as I covered my face, rolling around on the bed in sheer joy. However, it wasn't long before Wallace had to leave for a business trip. The house suddenly felt empty, and even the designer handbags in the closet couldn't spark joy anymore. My messages went unanswered, and I felt an unfamiliar sense of loneliness. After a week, I couldn't bear it any longer and decided to go find Wallace. But I never expected what I would see. From about 15 meters away, I watched as a woman threw herself into Wallace's arms, sobbing. As I drew closer and recognized her face, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was Elfrida Wakefield. She was the one who had written that slanderous article about me back then. Because of that, I had caused quite a scene, demanding to know why she would treat me so cruelly when we had no prior grievances. The weather had been gloomy that day. She had arrogantly hidden behind her roommate, her face full of disdain as she gave me an answer I never expected. Because I was ordinary. In her eyes, someone as ordinary as me should remain in the gutter, not aspiring to be with someone like Wallace Cargill. "Let go immediately, or I'll call the police." Wallace's icy voice snapped me out of my daze. Elfrida choked back a sob, her voice filled with resentment. "Wallace, what's wrong with me? How am I any less worthy than that woman in terms of status or background? Are you blind?" Aubrey Thornton rushed over, pulling Elfrida away. Wallace extricated himself from her grasp, his tone cold. "If you're not blind, you should realize we're in public, and I'm a married man." Elfrida looked at Wallace tearfully, then noticed me standing nearby. Her expression immediately hardened. But before she could say anything, Aubrey ushered her into a car, his gaze inadvertently drifting towards me. "What are you doing here?" Wallace asked, clearly surprised to see me. Noticing his troubled expression, I approached him slowly. "Instead of my usual playful "I missed you," I said softly, "I wanted to see you." Wallace seemed taken aback. He glanced around before speaking in a gentler tone, "We're in public. Don't talk like that." I looked up at him with a grin, moving closer for a hug. Once again, he held me at arm's length, so I settled for wrapping my arms around his arm instead. Wallace didn't push me away, but he appeared uncomfortable. No wonder people dislike long-distance relationships. Seeing Wallace again, I sensed that his guard towards me had risen once more, leaving me to put on a brave face and wait for his attitude to soften. Finally, Wallace Cargill and I were sharing a room. Today, I was most looking forward to bedtime. After my shower, I casually washed my underwear and hung it on the rack in the bathroom. When Wallace opened the door, he was visibly stunned for a moment. I pretended not to notice and sprawled on the bed to watch telly. As the door closed, I heard the sound of the lock turning. I couldn't help but make a snarky comment, but when I heard the rush of water, I found myself sneaking glances at the glass door. I suppose from the first moment I saw Wallace, I'd imagined growing old with him. I'd even thought about where we might buy our burial plots. Now that we were finally together, I felt all the hardships I'd endured were worth it. Lost in my thoughts, I started hugging the pillow and grinning like a fool. I only noticed Wallace had finished his shower when I rolled over. "What are you doing?" Wallace raised an eyebrow. The white bathrobe looked a bit short on him, revealing his muscular legs. My eyes darted about as I burrowed under the duvet, patting the space beside me. "Waiting for you to come to bed." "Come on." Wallace leaned down, slowly moving closer. I blinked, feeling a bit excited, but I hadn't expected him to grab a blanket and head for the sofa, casually lying down. "Wallace," I said, feeling dejected. Wallace lay there with his eyes closed, not making a sound. When the lights went out, the room plunged into darkness. I gazed at the figure on the sofa and silently closed my eyes. After that time we shared a room, Wallace became even more aloof. Sometimes I felt weary, always chasing after him. Yet I also felt I had an advantage, being so close to him. Gradually, I became comfortable entering Wallace's office freely. I even started calling him darling, which he tacitly accepted by avoiding the subject. "Darling, shall we go for steak tonight?" I suggested with a smile, leaning on his desk. Wallace glanced at me, his expression neutral as he replied flatly, "After my meeting." "All right," I agreed obediently, settling in for the long wait. I sat there sipping my English breakfast tea, feeling rather drowsy. "Meredith." Elfrida Wakefield's voice reached me. I froze for a moment, seeing her contemptuous expression just as it had been before. I had no intention of acknowledging her. Elfrida let out a cold laugh and said flatly, "I don't know what game you're playing, getting Wallace Cargill to marry you, but I think there's something you really ought to know." I pressed my lips together, immediately imagining she was about to tell me Wallace had some childhood sweetheart or unrequited love. However, I hadn't expected her to toss out a stack of documents that looked rather old. I raised an eyebrow and said coolly, "Sorry, I'm not interested." Elfrida wasn't in a hurry. She leisurely opened the file and threw a list at me. The names on that list. I vaguely remembered them as people who had interviewed with me. We had even exchanged experiences after it was over. Oddly, they had all made it to the final interview, but were ranked below me. "Where did you get this?" I asked, feeling a bit unsettled. Elfrida raised an eyebrow and chuckled, "Don't you see the stamp at the bottom? This is an internal document from Kensington Group. The custodian was your interviewer at the time, Aubrey Thornton." As if afraid I wouldn't understand, Elfrida said softly, "Let me put it this way. You ranked quite high, you were selected, but then you were kicked out. It was Wallace Cargill's order. Maybe he was afraid you'd harass him." Elfrida's words were like a thorn, striking me hard. I stared at the document, looking at the bright red stamp, feeling my hands start to shake. "Why should I believe you? You don't have to believe me. Go ahead and ask. Ask your colleagues at the company, ask Wallace Cargill, whatever you like. See who, besides Wallace Cargill, can change the list, who has the guts to change the list." "Shut up." I gripped my cup of English breakfast tea tightly, cutting her off harshly. "What, angry because I hit the nail on the head?" Elfrida couldn't help but sneer. "I heard Wallace Cargill bought you quite a few handbags. Must be his way of compensating you. You should be content with that." Elfrida was getting more and more carried away with her words. But I had no strength to argue, because Wallace Cargill's attitude at every moment seemed to indicate that what she said was reasonable and not at all wrong. It was just that I had been too immersed in this beautiful dream myself. I didn't want to cry in front of Elfrida, but as I hurriedly left and stood at the top of the stairs, I didn't know which way to go. I walked down the stairs in a daze. My phone rang. Wallace Cargill had sent a message. Something came up, "Can't make it. Go by yourself." Staring at the message on the screen, I felt a bit lost. Vaguely. I heard someone calling me, but I felt as if all my strength had been drained, unable to respond. Meredith! I've called you so many times as your mother-in-law. Are you treating my words as background noise? Winifred Cargill rushed up to me. I looked at her, my eyes gradually softening with tears. I choked up a couple of times, unable to hold back my sobs. Oh, why are you crying? Winifred Cargill looked at me helplessly, frowning as she took out a tissue and raised her hand to wipe my tears. I say a few words to you and you cry? The more she wiped, the more tears came. I cried and hugged Winifred Cargill, starting to sob. What's wrong? Don't cry, tell Mom if something's happened. Did that boy bully you? What's going on? I sobbed uncontrollably, unable to catch my breath, and could only shake my head helplessly. Darling, please don't cry like this. It breaks Mummy's heart to see you so upset, Winifred Cargill asked anxiously. What's happened? Tell Mummy about it. But I couldn't bring myself to speak, just as I couldn't ask Wallace that question. Wallace Cargill. Do you really despise me that much? Enough to deliberately alter the course of my life? In the quiet of the night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. All the moments of happiness I thought I had seemed to turn into daggers, piercing my heart. Choking back tears, I got up to fetch some water from the kitchen. As I approached, I heard Winifred scolding Wallace, who was responding half-heartedly, his tone dismissive. The tension was palpable. What are you so busy with? You're just like your father, can't you distinguish between work and life? Does your work need more attention than your life? How are you any different from machines? Tonight's matter is important, Wallace said, lifting his glass with one hand and taking a sip. His long fingers held the glass as he lowered his head, avoiding his mother's gaze. What could be more important than your wife? Winifred was still fuming. In the next moment, Wallace's jaw tightened. He looked at his mother with cold eyes and said slowly, "Every thing." As soon as the words left his mouth, Winifred was stunned. I froze where I stood, as if struck by lightning, immensely grateful for the darkness of the living room at that moment. "Get out!" Winifred shouted furiously. I hurried to hide nearby, afraid that if I was a second too slow, my self-esteem would shatter completely. Watching Wallace's figure disappear into the darkness, I felt a despair I had never known before. It was like drowning in an ocean, gradually losing all strength. After that day, I stopped pursuing Wallace and began to distance myself from him. Perhaps he was happy with this arrangement, tacitly agreeing by not saying a word, while I made plans to leave. Moving out? My best friend, Elfrida, looked at me in surprise. I kept my head down, browsing through listings and calculating prices. I replied calmly, yes, I've rented out my flat for 5 years. I'm planning to find a place to stay for now. Elfrida was a bit confused. Why do you need to move? Did Wallace mistreat you? No, of course not, I tried to maintain my composure. Meeting Elfrida's scrutinizing gaze, I forced a laugh and said, if anyone's doing the mistreating, it would be me mistreating him. How could I possibly be mistreated? Elfrida retorted, oh, come off it. Last time you were grinning like a fool, completely besotted with him. How could you possibly bring yourself to mistreat him? I lowered my eyes, smiling weakly. My heart felt like it had been viciously stabbed, but my pride wouldn't let me reveal the truth. He really did mistreat you, didn't he? Elfrida leaned in, examining me closely as she began to roll up her sleeves. No, he didn't, I quickly grabbed her arm, frowning slightly. He hasn't mistreated me. I just want to find a place to be alone for a while, that's all. Elfrida warned, he'd better not have. Brother or not, I'd give him what for if he did. As if my troubles weren't enough, the stock market took a downturn, tying up my money. My parents' new house needed renovations, and I didn't want them to suspect anything was amiss, so I kept sending money their way. Before long, my funds were nearly depleted. In my desperation, I thought of the wedding rings Wallace and I had. I had spent most of my savings on this pair of rings, but he had never worn his. At the time, I had asked him, somewhat disheartened, "Why don't you wear it?" "There's no rule saying I have to wear it," Wallace had replied, his answer impeccable. I had never considered that his refusal to wear it might be because he didn't want to, or perhaps even disdained it. After all, while the ring was expensive for me, it was merely a drop in the ocean for him. It was as if I had gained a god's eye view, seeing the truth time and time again. Wallace Cargill did not love Meredith Yardley. I'm sorry, but selling just one ring at this price is difficult. I'd suggest selling them as a pair, the jeweler said diplomatically. I felt a bit dazed, fidgeting with the ring in my hand. It had been so long since I'd spoken to Wallace Cargill. I wasn't even sure how to approach him anymore. It seemed I was gradually losing the courage to talk to him. What are you buying? Wallace's voice suddenly came from behind me. My heart skipped a beat, and I instinctively hid the ring. However, the shop assistant chimed in, "This lady is here to sell her wedding ring." Wallace's eyes darkened slightly. Mustering up my courage, I said quietly, "Did you bring your ring? Since you're here, we might as well sell them together. It'll be more profitable. Is this what you've been busy with lately?" Wallace looked down at me as if I'd committed some grave error. I clutched the ring tightly, keeping my head down as I spoke hoarsely. "We never wear them anyway, so what's the point of keeping them?" "Do you need money?" Wallace interrupted. "If you need money, you can always ask me." I gripped the ring so tightly that I could feel it leaving an imprint on my palm. "We're only pretending to be married." Wallace glanced at the shop assistant, who quickly moved away with her phone, pretending she hadn't heard anything. "Just give the ring back to me. I'll return the handbag and car you gave me too. Calculate the depreciation, and I'll pay you back later." At this point, I just wanted us to be even. Wallace took a deep breath and looked down at me. "Did I ask you to return anything?" I kept my eyes lowered. "I will return everything." Wallace pressed. "What do you mean?" I felt tired. I had planned to wait until I had some money before leaving, but I couldn't hold back anymore. "Let's get a divorce." Wallace stood there, stunned into silence. I looked up at him, thinking he might not have heard me clearly, and repeated, "Let's get a divorce." Wallace seemed unsure of my attitude and asked quietly, "Is this because I didn't have steak with you the other day? Are you angry?" For some reason, his question made me want to laugh. As if he cared so much about my feelings. I felt like I had nothing left to lose, so I looked at him with raised eyebrows and smiled. "No, I just want a divorce." Wallace's jaw tightened as if trying to confirm what I'd said. He lowered his voice, "Give me one good reason. I think this fake marriage is pointless. My parents are getting older, and I want to find someone to marry for real." I said, forcing a carefree smile, trying to sound as nonchalant as ever. "I want to have a baby." "Is that reason enough?" Wallace fell silent. I picked up my bag and stood up to leave, saying softly, "Please find the ring when you can. If you find it, return it to me. If not, just give me the cash equivalent. I'll send you the unit price." Not waiting for the ring, I packed all my belongings, thinking I should leave first. However, before I could reach the door, Wallace burst in, looking disheveled. His bespoke suit, which should have been the epitome of elegance, was marred by a crooked tie. "Where are you going?" he asked, breathless, his hand gripping the doorframe. "The divorce papers are on the table. I've already signed." "Have a look, and if there are no issues, please sign them," I said, gripping the handle of my suitcase, avoiding his question. Wallace's eyes turned cold. "I won't sign." I felt like laughing. I reiterated seriously, "Mr. Cargill, don't tell me you've gotten too caught up in this. We're only pretending to be married." At that moment, Wallace's expression changed slightly. He frowned and said, "This divorce is too sudden. I need some time to explain it to my mother. You can't leave here until I've explained everything clearly." I was taken aback and said quietly, "I can go and explain." Wallace replied, "That won't be necessary." I pressed my lips together, not knowing what to say. Wallace reached out and grabbed my suitcase, tossing it aside. He said coldly, "Didn't you want the ring? Let me look for it." I didn't know how long his search would take, but I really wanted to leave. However, I was short on funds. After weighing my options, I decided to stay and started frantically taking on freelance work. It was laughable, really. In the past, I worked hard to get closer to him. Now, I was working hard to get away from him. Before I knew it, my work schedule for the entire month was fully booked. If I managed to complete everything successfully, I could earn a tidy sum. The front door suddenly opened. With noodles still dangling from my mouth, I instinctively looked over. Wallace Cargill was holding a wine box, and when he looked at me, there was a clear flash of surprise in his eyes. "Didn't I message you about having steak tonight?" he asked. I froze for a moment, glancing at the 99+ notifications on my phone. Remembering that I had removed him from my priority list, I felt a bit flustered as I scrolled through my messages. "I didn't see it," I mumbled. "Then why were you always able to see them before?" Wallace's thin lips twitched, clearly displeased. He set down the wine box, took off his suit jacket, tossed it on the sofa, and sat down, staring at me intently. "Did you deliberately ignore it, or did you genuinely not see it?" I averted my gaze, locked my phone, and continued to eat my cold noodles. "What about all those messages of mine that you didn't reply to before? Did you deliberately ignore them, or did you genuinely not see them?" The silence that followed was deafening. I had already come to terms with the answer, but Wallace's reaction still made me increasingly upset. I couldn't understand why I used to believe he was genuinely busy. "Wallace, I'm very busy with work." I lowered my head. "I have work to keep me busy too." Before he could speak, I quickly added, "I'm eating now." "Please don't talk to me." Wallace began to take deep breaths, as if that was the only way to calm his emotions. He leaned back on the sofa, long legs crossed, watching me eat. He had always had an intimidating presence. I didn't dare raise my head, just eating my noodles at a steady pace. Finally, unable to bear the tension any longer, I tried to ease the atmosphere by opening a film on my phone, randomly skipping through the timeline. As a result, a character in the film shouted, "I want a divorce. I can't live like this for another day." It was awkwardly fitting. I skipped ahead again, and the character sobbed, "Anyone who doesn't get a divorce is a dog." I swear, I didn't do it on purpose. This was just what the algorithm recommended to me. In the end, I simply turned off my phone. When I looked up, Wallace had left, leaving only his suit jacket on the opposite chair. Perhaps because I had become busier, my schedule had become more similar to Wallace's. At 2 in the morning, I was crouching in front of the fridge looking for ice cubes when I heard footsteps behind me. I tilted my head slightly, and a pale, slender hand opened the refrigerator door, taking out a box of strawberries. I grabbed the ice cubes, wanting to leave quickly, but Wallace suddenly spoke. "I'm not giving the ring back." I froze, involuntarily turning back. "Then you can reimburse me for it." Wallace leaned on the counter with one hand, leisurely fiddling with the strawberries, and glanced at me. "No reimbursement." My mind buzzed, and I felt my temper rising. "I've packed up all the bags and the car. As soon as you give me back the ring, I'll return everything to you." "Wallace," I said, "I'm not giving it back." I clenched my fists, seeing his self-righteous attitude, and couldn't help but get annoyed. "I'm ready to give everything back to you. What right do you have to keep the ring?" "Wallace, if you don't like it, you can sue me." I gritted my teeth, truly wishing I could bite Wallace, but I could only rely on my rationality to hold back. Our marriage was a sham. "The ring is useless to keep." "If it's useless, why did you buy it?" Wallace retorted directly. I was so stunned by his response that I couldn't say a word. I seriously suspected he just wanted to provoke me. "Fine, keep it then," I snapped, turning to leave in anger. Wallace's expression remained calm as he looked up at me and said softly, "You were willing to buy it initially, which means you wanted to stay with me. We're already legally married, so why don't we give it a try? There's nothing wrong with my body, I can have children." I laughed bitterly, stopping in my tracks to look at him, and said coldly, "Wallace Cargill, you don't actually think the only reason I got married was to have children, do you? Wallace, if you have any other requirements, you can state them." I had to admit, a businessman is always a businessman. His tone, expression, and even every word he uttered made me feel cold, exactly like he was discussing a business deal. At that moment, I couldn't help but laugh sarcastically. I don't need a husband who thinks everything is more important than me. I thought I could control my emotions. But when I uttered the word everything, I felt my heart nearly stop, as if a raw, bloody wound was being repeatedly rubbed with sandpaper. The strawberry fell to the ground. Wallace Cargill looked up at me, his hands braced on the counter, trying to say something. But I didn't want to hear a single word. After that day, there was even less to say between Wallace and me, yet he often passed by my door. Work progress gradually improved. I threw myself into my job, occasionally attending offline collaboration meetings, treating them as afternoon tea outings. However, I hadn't expected that when I rushed to the cafe with my portfolio, Wallace would be there too, discussing business with a middle-aged man. Meredith? Barnaby Ainsworth, my senior, waved at me with a smile. I froze for 2 seconds, not expecting Barnaby to be at the table next to Wallace's. I could only reluctantly sit down. If we weren't in the same department, I wouldn't be able to catch you, busy bee, Barnaby joked. I set down my portfolio sheepishly, straightened my back, and after a brief chat with Barnaby, we began discussing the licensing agreement. Embarrassingly, I had completely forgotten that my design ID was on the contract, and Barnaby read it aloud. Dusty Meredith? Does this name have any meaning? What meaning could it have? It just meant Wallace hadn't married Meredith yet. I felt a bit helpless, resisting Wallace's sidelong glances, and smiled. It's just a random name, no special meaning. At that moment, I deeply regretted my unnecessary actions back then. Barnaby smiled gently. I'm glad to be working with you. Would you like to have dinner together tonight? I hesitated, wanting to politely decline, when suddenly a chair scraped harshly against the floor next to me. Wallace abruptly stood up and left. His crisp scent lingered briefly before vanishing. Perhaps I should be grateful that I've seen through Wallace. It doesn't hurt as much as before, and I won't mistakenly think he's jealous. As it neared 10 p.m., my phone began to vibrate. I glanced at the caller ID, slightly surprised that Wallace would call me. It must be your parents, Barnaby said with a smile, gesturing for me to answer quickly. I pressed my lips together, muted the phone and tossed it into my bag, saying with a smile, it's not. Don't worry about it. Barnaby nodded, sighing. There have been a lot of telemarketing calls lately. I smiled without replying, turning my gaze to the vast night, watching the flickering yellow lights with a sense of melancholy. The BMW stopped in the residential area. I waved goodbye to Barnaby with a smile, waiting until his car was out of sight before taking out my phone. Missed calls, 21. I pouted, silently taking out my spare key and unlocking the door. The living room was dark. But the moonlight through the window faintly illuminated a figure sitting there, with brows and eyes like clear streams, pure and filled with displeasure. What time is it? Wallace asked in a low voice. I didn't plan to answer him and was about to go upstairs, but he quickly stood up and blocked my way. Why didn't you answer the phone? I looked at him, involuntarily averting my gaze, trying hard to stay calm. I didn't want to. Wallace leaned down, staring at me. Do you have to make things like this between us over one sentence? I raised an eyebrow and laughed. I wouldn't dare to upset you. Wallace, I was just angry that day. I felt numb, speaking softly. People tend to speak their true feelings when they're angry, don't they? After a few seconds, I continued, why didn't you explain for the past few days? Is it because after weighing the pros and cons, you realized you need me for this fake marriage and couldn't find a better alternative at the moment? Wallace froze, a flash of bewilderment in his eyes. Understanding dawned on me, and I simply walked around him, heading upstairs. I wanted to get back to my room quickly, but in my haste, I tripped and fell hard, the pain bringing tears to my eyes. Wallace came over and lifted me by the waist. Let go of me. I pushed against him, kicking my legs. Stop moving. Wallace held me and sat down on the sofa, gripping my waist and keeping me in his arms. He lifted my skirt to my knees and held my legs. His palm was warm. I shrank back, feeling both embarrassed and annoyed, never imagining that the most intimate position would happen under such circumstances. Wallace Cargill. You scoundrel. Who was it that kept calling me darling before? Now you're calling me a scoundrel? Wallace frowned, his jaw resting on my shoulder as he looked down to check my injury, showing no intention of letting go. Unable to break free, I felt a lump in my throat and became even more upset. I'll call you whatever I want. What are you going to do about it? Move again, and I'll deal with you. Given my earlier struggle, I clearly realized that I was no match for Wallace, but I didn't want to give in. You wouldn't dare. I muttered in protest. Wallace took out the first aid kit from under the coffee table, opened it with one hand, and took out cotton swabs and antiseptic. I frowned, gradually calming down, silently watching Wallace apply medicine with the cotton swab, feeling enveloped by his crisp scent. I've ordered a new handbag for you, it's already in your room, Wallace Cargill said softly. I remained silent. Even after he finished applying the ointment and let go of my hand, I didn't say a word. I hurried upstairs, opened the door to my room, and without hesitation, grabbed the new handbag along with its box and threw it downstairs. One bag after another tumbled down. Wallace, somewhat irritated, stood up and looked at me. Meredith! My response was the sound of my door slamming shut. The next day, I left early to meet a client, avoiding Wallace. As we were chatting, the client's phone rang. Oh. What's that? The client exclaimed, startled. I kept my head down, fiddling with the portfolio, and watched as he eventually burst into laughter. Curious, I asked, what happened? The client could barely contain his amusement. Well, there was supposed to be a meeting today, but apparently the CEO had such a row with his wife that he couldn't sleep all night. He's called in sick with a headache. I chuckled, perhaps a bit unkindly. Which company's CEO? What's his name? I wonder if I know him. Wallace Cargill, the client replied. Whether Wallace was truly ill or not, I couldn't be sure. But when I returned home that evening, he was sprawled on the sofa, looking deflated, listlessly flipping through some documents. Wallace's gaze passed over me without pause, and I had no desire to engage with him. I headed straight for the stairs. Stop right there, Wallace said in a low voice. I didn't break my stride. Up the stairs, opened the door, closed the door all in one fluid motion. How do you expect me to have grandchildren with you behaving like this? Winifred Cargill's shrill voice pierced through the door just after 9 p.m. Before I could even stand up, the door swung open. Winifred, her face stern, turned to Wallace and commanded, "Get in there." Then she looked at me. I don't have many demands, boy or girl, I'll love them all the same. But you must have at least one. Our eyes met. Wallace, his face pale, glanced at me reluctantly as he entered the bedroom. The bedroom door slammed shut. Wallace stood rooted to the spot, then sat down in a nearby chair, his voice cold. Once she's gone, I'm leaving. I remained silent, put on my headphones, and continued sketching. The room was eerily quiet. At midnight, I finished my work early. Looking at Wallace, still sitting there, I said flatly, "She's probably gone by now." Wallace turned to look at me, almost spitefully, and headed for the door. I couldn't be bothered with him. I burrowed into my duvet and turned off the lights to sleep. However, not 5 minutes later, the bedroom door flew open, and Wallace darted into the bed like a gust of wind. At the doorway, Winifred's silhouette was visible, brandishing a feather duster. You ungrateful child, I've given you too much leeway. With the sound of the door closing, my suspended heart gradually settled. I couldn't help but look at Wallace beside me. Why haven't you told her about our fake marriage yet? Wallace glanced at me, his gaze intense. What are you looking at? Didn't you used to stare at me all the time? Can't I look at you now? Wallace retorted. His crisp scent was overwhelmingly strong, threatening to drown me. I mean, how could anyone resist a handsome man lying next to them? Without hesitation, I got up, opened the wardrobe, and took out another duvet to lay on the floor. What are you doing? Men and women should keep their distance. You sleep on the bed, I'll sleep on the floor. Wallace sat up on the bed, looking at me with displeasure. His voice was cold as he said, "Are you deliberately using my own words against me now?" I lowered my head, lying down on the floor with my pillow. You taught me well, you should be proud. I knew Wallace's temperament well enough. The probability of him trying to coax me was 0.99%, and after being mocked, he was even less likely to back down. So I felt safe enough to fall asleep. But I hadn't anticipated that this fellow would actually get off the bed and lie down next to me, pulling me into his arms. Wallace! I tried to struggle, but I was no match for him. Frightened, I didn't dare to even breathe. Don't do anything rash, I'll call the police. This is exactly how you used to hold me, Wallace suddenly said. I frowned, not wanting to speak, but he moved even closer, whispering, I admit, at first I only saw you as a business partner. Stop, I'm tired. I closed my eyes, not wanting my finally calmed emotions to be stirred up again by him. Wallace fell silent, but his arm remained wrapped around my waist. I curled up, not daring to move. This scene. I had imagined it many times before, but now that it was actually happening, all I felt was a bitter ache in my heart. I slept until 10 o'clock. When I woke up, Wallace Cargill was holding me and reading a magazine. Sunlight filled the room. I frowned, feeling a moment of unease, but when Wallace looked at me, I instinctively averted my gaze and pushed him away. Meredith, will we ever reconcile? He asked. No, I replied coldly, my answer resolute. Wallace seemed taken aback, visibly showing his distress. I combed my hair and opened the wardrobe to search for my clothes, saying flatly, Wallace, don't waste your energy. I've run out of patience for you. But when you called me darling, you meant it, didn't you? Wallace suddenly questioned. I ignored him, took my clothes, and went to change, taking the opportunity to freshen up. With Winifred staying here, Wallace seemed to have found an excuse to stay in the bedroom. This was his house, so I couldn't say much, but I quietly said, I hope when your mother leaves, you'll remember what you said before, the bedroom is mine, and the study is yours. Wallace acted as if he hadn't heard, opening a new toothbrush and cup, then standing behind me to brush his teeth. A week later, Winifred left. I threw out all the bedding Wallace had used and sprayed air freshener to eliminate his unique, crisp scent, the one that always made my heart flutter. You hate me this much, Wallace said, standing nearby and watching, anger rising in his voice. Why did you kiss me back then? I don't like you anymore, I replied, keeping my head down as I hung fresh bed sheets. Wallace gritted his teeth. Don't tell me you fancy that Barnaby? I paused, glancing at Wallace, and said coolly, by rights, you should call him Senior. Why aren't you denying it? A breeze swept across as Wallace stood there, staring at me intently. I need to hear you deny what I'm asking. Wallace, I'm not your employee. Stop using that commanding tone with me, I snapped, not holding back. Wallace's lips were pressed tightly together, as if he'd suffered a great injustice but couldn't express it. I looked at him and said flatly, Wallace, you're just not used to being rejected. You don't need to chase after me with this contrarian attitude to prove anything. If you must hear that I liked you to feel better, fine, I'll tell you I did like you. Is that enough? Please leave me alone. With that, I walked past Wallace, but he called out, remove the past tense. Changing the bedding had already wasted a lot of time. I didn't want to argue, so I went straight back to my room and started my day's work. About 3 hours later, there was a knock at the door. I kept my eyes down, ignoring it. Another series of knocks followed. Annoyed, I put down my paintbrush and rushed out, shouting, will you ever stop? Perhaps I was too harsh. Wallace looked startled, his face pale. He opened his mouth but said nothing in the end. I glared at him and said coldly, please don't disturb me unless it's important. I'm very busy. I slammed the door shut. Engrossed in my work, I felt a surge of joy as I made progress. When I checked the time, I realized it was already 3 in the afternoon. With Winifred gone, I could finally order some takeaway. I walked downstairs contentedly, but after a few steps, I saw Wallace collapsed on the floor. His face was as white as paper, with beads of cold sweat on his forehead. Wallace! I cried out in shock, rushing down to him. Wallace was barely conscious, his lips visibly bitten and bleeding. He looked incredibly fragile, his phone still locked beside him. My mind went blank, suddenly recalling that when he had come to knock on my door earlier, he had already looked quite unwell. The ambulance siren wailed. I watched the nurse check Wallace's blood pressure, my heart feeling as if it was being squeezed tight. I couldn't calm down even after we reached the hospital. The doctor's expression was grim. I couldn't help but feel anxious. "What's wrong?" The doctor frowned. "He has a fever. It seems to be appendicitis. We need to operate immediately." "Surgery?" My mind went blank. I had never had surgery in my life, but just hearing the word made my legs weak. "It will only take half an hour," the doctor said. With the doctor's words, my suspended heart eased slightly. But I hadn't anticipated that I would wait for 3 full hours without seeing Wallace come out. "Where's the patient's family?" a voice called. I started. "You are?" "I'm his wife," I said, feeling a bit panicked. The nurse briefly indicated that Wallace Cargill's fall was more severe than initially thought, with suspected internal bleeding. She warned that the surgery might take longer than expected and advised me to prepare myself mentally. As I watched the nurse leave, I collapsed into the chair, feeling a tingling sensation in my scalp. Panicked, I pulled out my phone and searched for the keywords the nurse had mentioned. I had hoped to gain more understanding and calm myself, but the more I read, the more frightened I became. The corridor outside the operating theater seemed to harbor a cold draft. Even the occasional gust was enough to send chills down my spine. Seeing messages from clients, I forced myself to focus and replied to them one by one, despite my distress. As I scrolled through, I came across the message Wallace had sent at lunchtime. "Wallace, it's time for lunch. Wallace, I just wanted to call you for lunch." In that moment, guilt and remorse washed over me. Seeing the in-surgery status, I felt a lump in my throat. After an entire night of waiting, the surgery finally ended. Seeing Wallace with an oxygen tube, I sat by his side, exhausted. "Didn't you say there was nothing wrong with your body?" I couldn't help but scold him, even though he was still unconscious. As I was still in a daze, I heard hurried footsteps approaching. "Mrs. Cargill," I instinctively said. Winifred Cargill opened the door, her face cold and eyes full of displeasure. "If I hadn't come here myself, were you planning on not telling me at all?" I hesitated, unsure of what to say. "You know, I never liked you. I thought you weren't from a good family. But he always cared for you, didn't he? Buying you cars and bags, more often than he did for me. Is this how you take care of him?" I lowered my gaze, not daring to speak. Winifred, already furious, looked at the unconscious Wallace and immediately said, "Fine. Ever since I found out you two weren't sharing a room, I knew your heart wasn't with my son. You should leave now. I'm angry, and I don't want to make things difficult for you." "I'm sorry," I apologized softly. Winifred turned away, sat by the hospital bed, and held Wallace's hand without saying another word. "Actually, Wallace and I had a marriage of convenience," I said, looking at Winifred's expression of extreme hatred towards me. I tried to keep my explanation brief and concise, bowing to express my apology. "I'm terribly sorry for deceiving you. I've already signed the divorce papers. Please don't worry, I haven't taken any of his property. I'll move out of his house as soon as possible." Winifred was too shocked to speak. I looked up at the still unconscious Wallace one last time before leaving the hospital room. Leaving him. And leaving behind the time I had once coveted him. After packing my belongings, I stood at the entrance of the mansion one last time, taking in the view of what was once my home. I could vaguely remember the first time I came here. The day we registered our marriage. I was overjoyed, clinging to Wallace's arm. Everything I saw seemed to have a dazzling beauty. He glanced at me from the corner of his eye, his expression indifferent, as if he couldn't understand my excitement. But I still felt happy, calling his name over and over, hoping I could call it for a lifetime. Because he was the most stunning presence in my youth. This marriage, perhaps it didn't end happily, but it fulfilled my initial dreams. You've played around and ended up divorced. Well done, you. My mom was ready to throttle me through the screen. I hung up in fright, collapsing in my new home, hoping for a fresh start. But Mom wasted no time in arranging blind dates for me. I could cry, really. Especially since the blind date was with Barnaby, my old uni mate. What a coincidence. We sat face to face across the table. I was so embarrassed I wanted to crawl into a hole. I looked at Barnaby apologetically. Sorry, mate. My mum's just bored. Barnaby looked at me with a gentle smile. Your mum means well. I think we get on quite well. We could try getting to know each other better. I blinked, vaguely catching Barnaby's meaning, and quickly waved my hands. No, 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 Barnaby. I've got quite a temper, not suitable for you. Barnaby laughed helplessly, saying softly, we're already friends. It seems odd to say we should start as friends, so let's just be good friends then. I nodded, a bit embarrassed, silently sipping my tea, my gaze drifting outside. Through the glass window, I thought I saw a car that looked just like my old Range Rover, even with the same sticker. For a moment, my sixth sense told me it might be Wallace, but then I remembered he shouldn't have been discharged from hospital yet. Walking down the long street, I looked back at the car on the road, sighed, and headed home just as the rain started pouring down. I thought I'd have to walk home in the rain, but suddenly an umbrella appeared above me, shielding me from the downpour. The rain misted around us. Let me walk you home. Wallace stood before me, his face pale, tilting the umbrella towards me. I glanced at his hospital gown and felt anger rising. Are you mad? Running out like this? With that, I started running towards home, not intending to stop, but Wallace followed me all the way. The rain got heavier, like a massive ink painting, gray and misty, yet not as pale as Wallace's face. Water droplets slid down his jaw. Wallace held the umbrella, looking down at me. Keep this umbrella. I saw his clothes were already soaked through and frowned slightly. You should use it to get back. Wallace lowered his gaze, silent. I sighed. You've just had surgery. Don't be silly. Wallace just stood there, not saying a word, insisting on leaving the umbrella with me. I sighed again and said softly, come up to my flat then. Really? Wallace looked up at me, a glimmer of joy in his eyes. I glanced at him and walked straight into the building. No, not really. Stepping into my home, Wallace looked around my flat awkwardly. I glanced at him and said flatly, too small for you? Wallace looked at me and said quietly, not as big as our marital home. We're divorced now, I said firmly. Wallace looked at me silently, avoiding the topic. I'm a bit cold. The sound of running water came from the bathroom. I checked the time, dug out a large bathrobe from the bottom of the wardrobe, and was about to place it by the bathroom door when I realized Wallace hadn't closed it. Honestly, I suspected he did it on purpose. Back then, he used to guard against me like I was a wolf. He wouldn't make such a basic mistake. Meredith, do you have a bathrobe? Wallace asked softly. I used a clothes hanger to hang the bathrobe inside. Don't let water get on your wound. Wallace obediently agreed. I looked at the increasingly heavy rain, reluctantly closed the doors and windows, turned on the air conditioning, and went to the kitchen to make some chicken soup. The doorbell rang incessantly. I looked at the simmering soup on the stove, about to say wait a moment, when Wallace, wrapped in the bathrobe, went to open the door. Who is it? I called out. But there was no response from the door. I was a bit confused and went to see who it was. Barnaby stood at the door, holding cold medicine, looking shocked as he glanced from me to Wallace. Barnaby. I didn't know how to respond. Barnaby's lips quivered. Mr. Cargill, hello. Wallace glanced at him coldly, his smile not reaching his eyes, his aura suddenly becoming more intimidating as he said slowly, hello. Barnaby forced a smile, placed the cold medicine on the floor by the door, and said softly, it's getting late. I won't disturb you too. I'll be off then. Wallace stood at the doorway, his eyes cold. It seemed only after Barnaby disappeared did he turn to look at me, his voice low and displeased. Do you want this? I pressed my lips together, walked over to take the medicine, and noticing his wet hair, I closed the door and said to him, bedroom. There's a hairdryer on the dressing table. Wallace glanced at the medicine in my hand, stared at it for a while, then looked at me. Go dry your hair quickly, I reminded him. Wallace seemed about to speak but held back, his thin lips pressed into a line. He obediently went to dry his hair. Looking at the tall figure standing in our cozy little nest, I said softly. Come here, drink this chicken soup. Oh. Wallace gazed at me intently, now being very obedient. He did whatever I said, sitting on the sofa and picking up the bowl. Seeing he had almost finished drinking, I glanced at his hair, which still looked damp. I couldn't help but reach out to touch it, feeling a bit exasperated. I tossed him a dry towel from nearby. "Dry your hair some more." "Oh." Wallace carelessly rubbed his hair a couple times, then put the towel aside. Gritting my teeth, quite wanting to hit him, I took the towel and stood beside him, pressing his head to start drying it. As a result, he seemed quite content, lowering his head to let me dry it. "Meredith, I'm so happy today," Wallace suddenly said. I looked down at him without a word. Our eyes met. A hint of expectation flickered in Wallace's eyes as he said softly, "Why aren't you saying anything?" "What should I say?" I replied. Wallace paused, his brow furrowing slightly, looking rather pitiful as he said in a muffled voice, "Didn't you used to always ask me about these things?" I was taken aback for a moment, as if transported back to when I used to chatter away. I would lean on the desk looking at Wallace. I didn't really understand his work, I just simply liked him talking to me. Even if it was just perfunctory. "I'm not interested anymore," I replied casually. A flash of anguish crossed Wallace's eyes as he said with double meaning, "Is it just these things you're not interested in?" I didn't respond. Wallace's eyes reddened, but he held back, forcing out a smile. "It's all right, I can talk about other things." "I'll eventually talk about something you're interested in." Seeing him like this, I felt a pang in my heart but said coldly, "Don't do meaningless things." "It is meaningful." Wallace suddenly raised his voice. "Suit yourself." I glanced at him and tossed him the towel. "You sleep on the bed. Get some rest. I'll take you back tomorrow." I turned my back to him, wanting to avoid seeing him. But I still caught his reflection in the mirror, sitting dejectedly on the sofa, looking helplessly towards me, his expression darkening bit by bit. That night it rained heavily. I looked at the clean hospital gown in the bathroom, quietly closed the bathroom door, and seeing Wallace already asleep on the sofa, I could only return to my own bed. Rainy nights always carry a sense of both clamor and tranquility. "Meredith." I lay with my eyes closed, curled up under the covers. Wallace slowly approached, crouching by the bed, his cool hand gently caressing my face. I clutched the blanket, not wanting to give any response. The next moment, he took my hand, carefully kissing the back of it as he said softly, "Don't send me away. When I was in the hospital, I waited every day, waiting for when you might come see me. But I waited day after day only to realize you didn't want me anymore. I just wanted to see you." As if pained to his core, Wallace's voice was choked with tears. "So this is what it feels like to be ignored." "I'm sorry." My throat tightened, but I could only hold it in, that indescribable feeling of suffocation threatening to burst forth. I never denied that Wallace was in my heart. I could forgive his coldness, arrogance, sharp tongue, even his disdain. But the matter of the list affected my future. I couldn't move past it, couldn't forgive it, couldn't speak of it. In this life, I could do without love, but I couldn't let love make me compromise myself, swallowing down bitter pills. The next day, I notified my best friend to take Wallace away, but he stood downstairs looking up at me, his face ashen. 2 weeks later, the news of Wallace's discharge from hospital made headlines. In the footage, his eyes were dim, yet close-ups of him were still captured by many and became a hot topic online. In less than a day, it was all thoroughly scrubbed clean by Kensington Group, not allowing anyone to see the ugliness of the man in power. "Hey, he's out of hospital. Do you want to come see him?" my best friend called. I declined softly. "No, it's over between us. There's no need for any more contact." My friend sighed. "Are you really okay with this?" "I'm telling you, there's this woman at their company called Elfrida who keeps going to your marital home." I remained silent. "There's something else," my friend couldn't help adding. "Aubrey betrayed the company. While Wallace was in hospital, he colluded with outsiders and lost the company quite a few clients. Wallace is really in a mess now." My mind went blank as I exclaimed in surprise. "Aubrey? Wasn't he Wallace's personal assistant?" "Some personal assistant, more like a ungrateful bastard," my friend sighed angrily. "Selling the company's internship spots, embezzling funds. Now he's even trying to shift the blame. I'm so angry I could kill him." It was as if something triggered a memory. I recalled the first time I recognized Aubrey. He shook his head at me, gesturing not to reveal that we knew each other. At the time I thought he was afraid Wallace would get jealous. Feeling confused, I suddenly desperately needed an answer. Have they found out whose spots he sold? My friend sighed. They haven't started investigating yet, afraid some longtime employees who got in through the back door would find out and cause unrest. Who was Aubrey colluding with? I went through all of Kensington Group's competitors in my mind, narrowing down the possibilities, until I stopped at the name Barnaby Ainsworth. I was stunned. Without realizing it, I became aware that my copyright might go down the drain. That was my entire youth's worth of artwork. I didn't understand the machinations of the business world, but I knew very clearly what losses I would suffer. For a full 3 months. No media reported on this, everything seemed to be churning beneath the surface. But when the time came, news quickly spread of Aubrey's imprisonment and Elfrida and Barnaby's detention. My friend was overjoyed. Seeing the food arrive, she immediately set out plates for me. Darling. I held my phone, worried about my publishing matters. I had no appetite for anything and absently swiped away the news. My friend slowly pulled out a document. I was a bit dazed, casually opening it to see the clear copyright documents. I looked at her in surprise. Where did you get this? Friend, someone got it, not me. He didn't come, afraid you wouldn't be happy. I pressed my lips together, thinking of how I had already said goodbye to Wallace that day, and silently flipped through the document. On the last page, I saw an offer letter, with a handwritten note from Aubrey apologizing to all those he had wronged. In that moment, I felt a bit dazed. I picked up the letter, only to see a card fall out. Ms. Yardley, if you had joined Kensington Group back then, you would certainly have become the company's most outstanding designer. Signed, Wallace Cargill. It was formal, in Wallace's handwriting. I looked down at it, as if seeing my tearful younger self from years ago clutching a phone. Wasn't this the kind of recognition I had been waiting for? This was the value of my youth.